Greetings, all. Welcome back for Chapter 8. Been pretty busy lately. Been really enjoying myself, though. As is most assuredly the point. Enjoy yourself, enjoy life. Tonight, in honor of the Emperor's wineskins and the chapter at which I'm going to be reading to you, I have a horn of wine. Rather good stuff. And so, without further introducing, let's shall. Chapter 8 The Viking and the Emperor. Harold Sigurdsson, who some knew as a hard ruler of his warriors, awoke in the smothering comfort of his room. The grand four-post bed, adorned with silks and fine soft pillows. He lay in it, already in a sweat with the day's heat and humidity pressing upon him. His long chestnut hair still a tangled mess with the activity of the night before, and his arms were still out to both sides, holding fast the participants of those activities. He looked left and right at the dark beauties who he'd bedded, and closed his eyes and relaxed into the satisfaction of his achievements. During the sex last night, he'd been thinking about many things. Other women he'd had, the great accomplishments that accompanied his names, the respect his warriors all showed him, the enormous wealth he'd attained in his time in Midgard. When he was not in the act of love-making, his dreams were far the more returning to his home. A warrior prince come to make himself king with the wealth of all the Mediterranean to bolster his claim. He lay awake now, still erect with the morning's routine, and dreamed of putting all the old enemies to death. The ones who'd had buried themselves in his mind when he was a young man. The deaths would be so damned righteous. He'd have it done at a feast, perhaps. Harold sighed loudly and squeezed the women's breasts, one for each hand. Power, wealth, women, prestige, status, an army, a hardcock just waiting to take these two again, and rooms in the palace in the grandest city in the world. And still, he was unsatisfied. Not until he avenged himself would he be at peace. Your morning meal, Lord, said a serving woman who came directly, into the room. He had instructed that they were to come in no matter what state they feared he was in. He wanted to be seen in his prowess. He sighed contentedly again. Today was going to be hot. He untangled himself from the women and stood. He thanked the woman. She nodded, but didn't even have the indecency of gazing at his cock. Oh well. He shrugged and went to the table where a platter of food was laid out. There was fish and roast bird and figs and Italian tomatoes. There was also boiled eggs and cheese and a jug of water and one of wine. Harold took the jug of water and poured himself a large cup and drained it in one draught. Then he belched loudly and cracked his neck. The room had no polished mirror, so he only looked down and admired the bulky muscle that tensed as he flexed it. Someone's awake, the woman on the bed said. He turned, and she looked down. He knew she feigned the surprised awe she showed staring at him, but he didn't mind. Someone is very awake. Was talking, the other said, still shutting her eyes into the pillow. They both of them spoke Greek, and he could understand some of their speech, enough for his purposes. Though, at his meeting today, he would have a translator with him, as he didn't want to slow the proceedings by a minute. Are you coming back to bed? she asked, and he understood all she said. The next sentence was quick, though, and the only word he managed to pull from it was, "Wine?" He smiled and brought the jug over to them. "Are you thirsty for wine already, at this time?" he asked. He stood there and looked out the window to see the sun glowing above the horizon. It had risen hours ago, but it always seemed to climb so early in this part of the world. "Wine," the woman repeated. She then put a hand over her eyes and lay back down on the bed, groaning softly. The curve of her hip rising from the narrow waist was incredible to his eyes. "Yes, my darling women, have some wine." He sloshed some of the jug's contents out over the two of them in his bed. Water splashed over them, and they shrieked and rose to their knees. They dried themselves off with his silken sheets. "You water, asshole!" These were the only words he understood as the younger one shouted at him. "Oh no, what have I done now? Nothing quite like Christ, am I? Wine into water. How terrible of me." He laughed at his own joke and drank from the water, from the jug, water spilling at the sides of his mouth and pouring down his body. Now he went to the table and picked up the wine and a cup. This he brought over to the bed and smirked, as both of them weren't anywhere near as fawning as they'd been before. He swung the wine toward them and it almost spilled over the rim. They recoiled again. "No, take it, come on." He pushed forth the jug again, very nearly spilling, and they fixed him with hexing stares. He laughed, having brought the truth out of them at last. They probably hated him. "Good." He poured the wine into the cup and passed it to one and then handed the jug to the other. "Don't finish all of that before noon," he said. He spoke in his own Norse tongue and knew they had no idea what he was saying. He laughed again. "Bitches," he said to their dumb ears. They drank gratefully, their smiles having returned. The room had a large wardrobe that he dressed himself from. It contained all the fine garments he'd brought from the court of the King Yaroslav, and he chose only the most regal and well-made vestments for his meeting today. Finally, he took an ornate silver cross from a small hook and bowed to put it around his neck. He always displayed the beautiful crosses he'd taken on his conquests outside the clothing, so that everyone could see his devotion. The effect of his dressing done, he walked back through the room and made for the door. "Do you not want more time with us, Lord?" asked one of the women. He turned back to them, still naked, still alluring. He smiled at them, and this prompted them to start kissing each other and giggling. "Temptation," he said in Greek. "I will have you tonight. Now I go to the Emperor." They appeared crestfallen. They were certainly well paid. Harold walked out into the hall and made straight for the right, going to the place where he had been instructed to meet the Emperor. "Håkon, Eric, come on," he said to the two Varangian who he posted at his door. His favored personal guard followed him. They wore no armor on the hot day, as they were all still under the protection of the city of Midgard, and further in the protected palace itself. "Lord," they both said in greeting, then followed after him. They each bore a long falx, a polearm with a curved blade on top. The weapon was Greek in origin and was well respected among the Varangian. There were many rooms in the palace he was well familiar with, and he passed by all of them now on his way to the terrace, where Michael the Fourth awaited. He rounded a corner and saw the open doorway at the end of the hall. The terrace beyond had a stone table and chairs, all illuminated in the blinding rays of the sun. He hoped there'd be more wine out there. The Emperor was not sitting at the table. He hoped he would not have to wait long. Harold emerged into the sunlight and squinted at the brightness. There appeared to be no guards around him, and so Harold sat at the table. "Protecting from the warrior?" asked a voice, and Harold whirled to see the large Stephanos standing cross-armed against the wall by the door. "Ugh, the stern one. Why do I always have to talk to you?" asked Harold, matching the man's language. Stephanos smiled. "God wants to punish you." They smiled at each other, and Harold strode to him. They clasped hands. "What?" Stephanos looked down into his hand, where a silver coin had been passed to him. Are you trying to bribe me? Again? It will work eventually." They both laughed. "The Emperor should be here soon. Go on, but you keep this. I won't be bribed." He tried to pass the coin back. "Pfft, I'm not taking that back. You're in my pay now." Stephanos threw the coin then, and Harold had to duck it. "Oh, I'll get you eventually." Stephanos laughed, and Harold went to the table with his men. You both can sit too. Look, they've put out some food and drink. Sit, eat." The two men needed no further instruction and sat down with their lord. "Wine?" asked one of them. "You drink it first. See if it tastes like poison." The man Eric laughed. "You, I think, are spending too much time around the Emperor. Paranoid?" he asked, and drank a huge gulp of the wine. Then he looked at Harold with surprise in his face. "Oh, Lord, it does taste like poison." He looked back down into it. I think I shall have to test it more to be sure." "What?" asked Hakon. "Give that here. I have to be certain." He took the ewer then and drank from it. Definitely poisoned, Lord. Let us both get every drop of this safely away from you." "Give me that," Harold commanded, reaching for them. "I'll order you both overboard next time we're sailing." "I said give it." Laughing, Håkon backed away and put an arm out in front of him to defend. Harold advanced and tried to sidestep so he could lock the man's shoulder and arm. Håkon, struggling and sloppily, put the ewer to his lips, drinking as much as he could. Wine sloshed down the front of his tunic, and Harold managed to pull it from him. Then deftly he backed up, and Håkon spun away, sputtering and laughing. Finally, with the wine, Harold allowed himself a deep drink. It helped to fight away the grogginess that still haunted his brain. The table also had more of the local food, and they ate together and drank and laughed, in that moment caring little for any decorum and just enjoyed the food. "All hail High Michael of Paphlagon, the Emperor of Rome, all Byzantium," said an annoying voice from the door. "Stand and welcome his holy presence." "All right, lads. Up." They all stood while Hakon and Eric stepped back and served as the stoic guards they were expected to be. The man who'd announced the Emperor was a greasy little sycophant named Glengar. Harold would love to put a knife through the man's eye. He looked at the door and saw the Emperor walk out into the sun then. The Emperor was a man. A middle-aged and well-dressed man who walked with his shoulders back and an air of confident superiority, but he was just a man. Michael IV wore his fine purple robes with a gold sash and a brilliant golden crown. With the emperor were two well-armored guardsmen. Varangian, of course. He always chose men from among the guard force who towered in great height. There were many, had he to choose from. They stood with spears and shields, their helmets hiding their eyes and making them a menacing figure. These men would die gladly and slay many foemen in the defense of the emperor. Harold nodded to both of them too. "Varangian Herr," he said in his slow, sonorous voice. Thank you for coming. I am glad you were bidden and are partaking of the food without waiting. Harold nodded, the closest he'd come to a bow. This upset Glengar. As usual, Harold was well aware that had he waited to eat, he'd be being thanked for doing as was supposed to in showing the Emperor reverence. The Emperor expressed himself as master of all the world in all ways. Let us talk. The Emperor slowly walked to the table and sat. Can you pour me a wine? He asked. I would be honored. He gladly poured wine, the rest of the wine, into the cup for the Emperor. Now, what news of your raids? Tell me of the Circlander threat you have faced. Harold nodded. We will need more drink. The Emperor snapped his fingers and a man scampered off for the effort. We raided much, Lord. The court translator leaned down and whispered his words. We fought and hunted the Circlander and the pirates. We took many ships upon the seas and sacked many of their bases. They belong to you now. Some pirate strongholds we found and took on Anatolia itself. Then in the Africa, we won battles and took 80 enemy castles there. 80 castles in Africa? That is quite the claim. Go on. The castles were not all in Africa, no. I count among those we took in the Tigris and Euphrates as well. Oh, I see. So 80 castles all told, across your many exploits. That is still quite the feat, my bearded friend. Go on. I took much in Sicily too. There my army took 4 castles and won many battles. The island is well cleaned out of the enemy's station and has been put to your hand. The Emperor nodded, smiling at this. Good. And it is not only the land we have taken for you. The pirates dead. We have also for you taken great loads of wealth that shall come to swell your stores. This made Michael smile now. Glengar then whispered into the ear of the interpreter. The man tilted his head over and listened. Harold watched this with a quiet anger in him. Michael only smiled at him, though, not noticing. And the tithe paid to the Emperor? Asked the translator. Harold looked at him with a flat stare, then transferred it to Glengar. The Emperor has his due. Always do I pay out from the take to his coffers. Always. The translator said all this in Greek to the Emperor. Michael IV looked at Harold quizzically, without knowing that the man had asked him what the man had asked him from Glengar. It seemed only that he was defending himself for no reason. Suspiciously. Probably Glengar's intent. That is good, Michael said with a smirk. Tell me about this campaign in Italy. Harold nodded and pursed his lips, which had the effect of pushing his mustache down over his mouth. We were at first successful in our attack on the Italian campaign. There were many battles to be won, but the enemy was bolstered by Norman mercenaries, and we were driven from the lands there. Normans are your cousins, are they not? A long time ago they were. They were settled in the lands of Francia, but were Norse first. Now they work as mercenaries and traders. Perhaps I should have some of them in my Varangian guard. Strong warriors such as that would be best for a mercenary guild. Harold and the Emperor stared at one another. Harold finally smiled. That is for your majesty to decide. Either way, that is when we received word that we were called here, and here we are. And that is what I wanted the most to talk to you about. You have been doing well, Varangian Harold. Exceedingly well. Your raids throughout the Levant and the Near East, and now victories along the coasts in the Sicily. Moorish held Sicily. Now has had Christian dominion put there. Your work has not gone unnoticed, not by me, or not by our enemy. The Caliph, for that is the name of the Muslim emperor, has agreed to terms. This last he punctuated by placing his hand on the table between them and leaning in. You and my other commanders have made these campaigns a success. The uprising in Italy? Nothing, not compared to the threat we have been facing from the east. The Holy Land, Harold. That is where most I wished to point your sword. Axe, Harold said, then waved the translator away from that. My thanks, Lord. My Varangian have been well used to this end. They are your wolves. The Emperor laughed. Everything is wolves to your people. What I have to tell you now is of greatest importance, though. We have received word. These terms. We are allowed to send troops and masons to Jerusalem itself to rebuild a church there. Is this an important church? Much riches to reclaim. Oh, no. Nothing like that. You will go but to repair it. We must rebuild the Christian presence in Jerusalem, my friend. While there, I'm sure you'll find occasion to raid the banditry. Good heavens, you might even take a pilgrimage to the River Jordan. Harold smiled. How grand such a thing would be to write down in my story. Tell him, I say, that we'll make certain his workers get to the city. It is more than even that, my wolf, the Emperor said, leaning forward and holding his thumb and forefinger together. This moment marks a change in the Empire. All the campaigning we have done. Now it's we, thought Harold. All the work done to secure the lands. We pave the way for something grand, Harold, something that will resonate through the annals of history. The first step, I think, is to rebuilding of this church. Harold smiled and clasped his hands over each other on the table. The man's insane, he thought. All the better to keep winning my riches. I'm glad he likes me. I like you, Harold, the Emperor said. I think it is a long past time that I make official a decree that all will respect, as it is already how you go about behaving. The Emperor squinted slightly, saying this. There was a momentary edge in his expression. Glenger then came forward with a scroll and handed it to Michael the Fourth. He took it and handed it directly to Harold, who took it without a word. Harold Sigurdsson, I am making you the Grand Commander over all the Varangian Guards. You are hereby granted full authority over their activity and conduct to administer as you so choose. Your tithe to my office shall remain as it has ever been, and your authority shall always be placed ever into my imperial legislation. He grinned broadly at him. This is a great honor, Michael. Thank you with all my heart. God bless you. Glenger had stepped forward at his slight in conduct, but Michael the Fourth only waved a dismissive hand and laughed. You keep on service as you have, my friend. Great things come. He leaned back in his chair and looked around the view from the terrace. The Hagia Sophia, the Golden Sound, the very Bosphorus. It is an exciting time to be a Christian, my friend, and you shall be as a tip of the spear in this. And it is the reconstruction of the church in the Jerusalem that begins this work. You should know that the church is in total disrepair. Well, that is not entirely true. The church was destroyed. Some holy fervor took the Muslims some years back. I know not what exactly it was, but you know the pagans. Hard to trust them to behave in any rational way. Whatever the case is, we are now granted the opportunity to rebuild our seat in the Holy Land. This shall be your first charge as commander over all the Varangians. Though, now I think of it, you may also want to spend some time in the city to learn the movement and actions of the other forces of the Varangian Guard. At least, you know, to know before you leave again. Oh, that won't be needed. I know already exactly what all of them are doing, and so I would have no amendment to their duties. They are all of them good and loyal warriors who perform their actions in your service. I think I'll leave them as they are doing. That is well. He looked somewhat disappointed to hear so. Speaking of heathenry, though, I wonder if you might consider the conversion of all your hosts to Christianity. I hear report that many of the Varangians still worship false gods. That won't be necessary, Harold said, without hesitation. They worship the only god that matters in this regard. Michael the Fourth looked intrigued. They do? Why, yes. They all worship and kneel at the feet of plunder and wealth. So long as they do that, as ever they will, they are all of them my men, your men. They'd sack Jerusalem itself if you so ordered it. Especially if they knew they'd be allowed a hand at the spoils. Michael the Fourth laughed. Sack the holy city. What an idea as that. Of course, I cannot consider such a thing. No, that would be a blasphemy, of course. He sighed. He seemed to be wrapped in thought. Wrong wrapped. Excuse me. A moment longer. The Emperor then coughed in long sputters, and Glengar was there to bring him a kerchief. Are you well, Lord? Harold asked. I am fine enough. Northman. He grunted through a suppressed cough. I am well. He breathed heavily after the bout and took a drink from the wine. You lead such a life of adventure, Harold. I do, Lord. There was something strangely disquieting in his speech. These lands are all of them new. That is such a fine thing. To see new lands and to fulfill my quest and adventures in foreign and beautiful lands, it's been my great privilege and joy. I think I should like to join your efforts sometime, Commander. Your fame and wealth grow ever. I admire you. His look now spoke to a quiet sadness. Then come with me, Harold said with a shrug. Glengar nearly fainted on the spot, his eyes growing wildly, and his breathing sharpening. Harold saw this and smirked at him. Come when next we go raiding. Join with your mercenaries and see your own power forced onto the lands. Michael the Fourth laughed at the idea, his laughter turning to quickly stifled coughing. He cleared his throat and nodded to him. You're all the benefit of youth, your ambition and energy. You are infectious to the spirit, my friend. I think I may do as you suggest. But I cannot now. There are things brewing in this Byzantium I must administer, and I can only do so here. My well-beloved Empress Zoe would much rather me stay here. You will always have a place on my longship, Lord. If the great Michael the Fourth should so desire, you can see the very burning of the enemy that you so desire. Imagine yourself earning Weregild and taking towns and cities by the sword. Michael the Conqueror. Like a Trajan before me, he mused. Do you know what it means to have the weight of 1,000 years of imperial legacy put onto your shoulders? Can you but imagine the strain of having the greatest men in history be your forebearers? He looked now long distant as he spoke. Harold doubted the man would hear him if he said anything. Harold knew, of course, the exact sense he referred to, the great destiny the past kings have made for you. His half-brother, Olaf the Saint, having been a great man who'd been slain and lost an entire kingdom. All those people now languishing without his rule to guide them. Word had come with the new Varangian that his brother's bastard son Magnus had been installed as a ruler in the north, the boy being surrounded with advisors who made the real decisions and ruled the kingdom there for the boy. Harold's destiny being lived out by another. My liege, excuse me, my liege, came the voice of a woman from the door. Harold turned and saw her. Zoe had come. She was accompanied by 2 serving girls and wore her white and purple gown. Her head was adorned with a golden crown made with subtle yet shining jewels, and her hair was woven perfectly. The Empress Zoe was the embodiment of stature and nobility. She and Harold met their stares, and her dark eyes captured him, as they always did. Those eyes spoke entire lifetimes of wisdom. He found himself transfixed again in those eyes. Harold did not lust after the queen or her power, but he could not deny that there was a strong power within those eyes. You are come home. I saw your ships enter the Sound. I find it strange this is the first I am seeing you, Harold. My lady, he said, standing as she approached. There was ever much to be done before I reported my doing to the Empire, or to court, but you know I cannot stand court. He truly could not. Varing, she said. She always referred to him that way. He sat and leaned back in his chair, every muscle on the front of his body flexing as he felt his own strength. Harold felt the gaze of the Empress Zoe upon him. He knew she desired him. He could feel it. And now then, what shall you do today, you think? I have so many curiosities about you, my friend. Harold looked at him with fire in his eye. I'm going. We have a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to make, haven't we? When is better? When could be better? Today. Well, yes, but you'll go today? The Emperor asked, incredulous. When is better? When could be better? Today is the only day. But, well, the stonemasons aren't ready. Well, then gather them together and put them onto my ships, as many chisels as they may so need, Harold said, standing. The god won't wait for those who wait too long. Destiny is not something you can lie around and expect. If you don't quest out to hunt it down, another may claim it while you rest warm and comfortable in your bed. The Emperor looked at the man with an impressed disbelief. Harold, I will follow you along on a quest someday, believe me. For now, be as patient as you are able. I need your direction here in the city for some matters yet. Perhaps another few days. Glengur, bring forth the reports. The man did so. There were scrolls, pages of writing, ledgers. All of that needs my attention. Oh, I am afraid, being the commander over all the Varangian guards comes with many responsibilities, friend. These matters shall need your attention now. I have my own kingdom to attend. Until next we meet, Herald. Fare thee and your fells well, Varing, Zoe said, with an alluring glance, and then turned to leave with her husband. Harold stood and watched them both off. Then, when there were only Varangian and Stephanos on the terrace, he went to the two guards who accompanied Michael before they turned in to follow the Emperor. He clasped arms with each of them with an emboldened smile upon his face. Brothers, he said deep and loud. Commander, Commander, they said back. They knocked their heads together, lightly, as Harold wasn't wearing a helmet. Go on, attend your charge. Dangers abound in this fucking hornet's nest. The both of them laughed, their laughter ringing around in the helmets. Aye, Commander, they both said. Harold waited for them all to have left, and then he was alone with his personal guard and the Byzantine serving man. The death of me! It will be the death of me! What? The woman? Asked Håkan. No, he means responsibility, Eric said. Neither of those things. Ugh, maybe both. I meant royals. Now you! He said this last in Greek and pointed at the servant. Wine! Much wine for my brave companions and me. End of chapter 8. I really enjoyed this chapter. I wanted to start doing more interludes where I was going to have Harold as a character, and this is going to be the first interlude, but I decided instead just to keep it as its own chapter, and I'm really glad that I did. I'm really glad the way that it turned out. Really, really fun. Just a lot of administrative things. From the sagas and from what I was able to read about Harold and his life, everything that I said in there was correct. Between last chapter and this chapter, there was a segment where I did not input, and that was Harold's brief and disastrously failure of a campaign against Italy, where apparently an enormous amount of Norman mercenaries went and rebuffed the Varangian invasion campaign, call it what you will. So at this time, when they had arrived back in Midgard, they were a smarting army, having recently been defeated, even though they could have been resting on the successes of their raiding throughout Sicily, which are by far some of the more famous stories of Harold. However, in the interest of things being historically accurate, I decided to keep that in there. Actually have it as a report made by Harold toward the Emperor, because it's true. These things happened. And perhaps another time I will go on a big long rant about how much I disliked that TV show Barbaren called Barbarians, which had the Latin and the German being the languages. I loved a lot of it, many parts of it, but the ending was just so disappointing because of needless historical inaccuracies. I'm something of a snob when it comes to historical inaccuracies, and so when I was writing this book, I made especially careful to be as historically accurate as possible and not to fudge anything for the sake of the narrative, because I don't like that excuse. The events that happened are dramatic enough on their own, and you do not need to embellish or downplay or alter or change for the sake of a more cohesive linear story, especially not when you have the benefit that I do, a novel. I don't have to cut anything down for size to make it into a movie or a TV script. Never tried writing a script, never tried writing a screenplay. I've only ever done novels because A, I love them, most importantly, and B, I have as much time as I like. I can do whatever I want. It's so much freedom. I have demonstrated this before. I have told you all this before, but I love writing. It is it's the best thing I've ever done for myself in terms of mental health, in terms of personal empowerment. It is just fantastic. Write a book, everyone. That will be today's lesson. Write a book. And I really hope you enjoy the chapter, and I will see you next time for chapter 9. Be brave, my warriors.